Hey guys, welcome to the Refined Savage. This week on the show we have Drew Dillan, Olympic weightlifting coach extraordinaire. Drew's worked with some Olympic athletes and some fabulous Olympic weightlifters in the area and all over the country. Check this one out. It was a great podcast. Real interesting stuff and a little bit different than what you normally hear from an Olympic weightlifting coach. Check it out.
Drew Dillan, thank you for having us out here at Project Lift. This is CrossFit Endeavor, right?
Yep. Welcome, Mark. It's
Thanks.
Project Lift and CrossFit Endeavor, and also Endeavor Defense and Fitness. I think that's where they really talk a lot about.
Is the gentleman here you wanted me to meet somebody else who was is the defense specialist guy?
Aaron
right?
Genetti.
Okay. Oh, so I met him earlier.
Yep.
Okay. What was his background? Is he?
So his background, he got started in Krav Maga years ago, and that was his passion, and that led him to CrossFit for helping individuals figure out how to become in a higher physical state to defend off somebody.
Right.
Went through BJJ, trained with a lot of the experts in the areas of close quarter combats with guns and knives. You know, it's a really interesting background.
Yeah.
But then really started to get a passion around the active shooter stuff a couple years back now. But he started offering these free active shooter seminars just here in town. Anybody could come. He was offering it to schools and teachers and everybody. And it was right around the time one of the school shootings, and the news caught that he was doing these for free and came, and it just went,
Yeah, that should be part of it, all these teachers' trainings now. I don't think you should be. That should be part of the MO every year. You should have to take that.
What's really interesting about his class, and I can say this because it was when the media came. He came to me and he goes, "Hey, would you be willing to sit in, on this? So we have a bigger, group that we're teaching."
Right.
And I'm like, "Yeah," and I've been meaning to take it, but never had.
Right.
And I took it, and it was so fascinating. It's just you don't know what you don't know, but then also, I think the thing they really dive into is helping you understand how you'll react.
Yeah.
Even when I say that, even in a training scenario, you truly won't understand when it's real.
Yeah.
But it at least gets you starting to think of like, okay, have I ever put a tourniquet on?
Sure.
Where did I put this tourniquet? I hear gunfire, people are screaming. Do I freeze? Do I run?
Right.
What are the thoughts going through my head? And there was a guy, Rob Pincus, who's a expert in the areas of close quarter combat with firearms. And he came into town. He was one of Aaron's mentors to help him with the media since they were hitting. And they did like a special component to it that if you have a concealed carry, and I don't have a concealed carry, but they invited me along. And I thought it was just so fascinating how well they were able to make you realize your accuracy in an unstressed state and then in a stress state.
Yeah.
And they did such a good job. But leaving that course, I actually realized something I didn't know about myself, was I did have a bit of a innate fear over a firearm.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes you question it. Like, it's not a magical device.
Sure.
It's got to be loaded. It's got to be set and then pointed straight at you.
Yeah. Right.
It can't magically get you.
Yeah.
And it was an interesting course.
There's a lot of ways to slip up and.
Yeah. There's a lot of ways to make that gun fail.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the thing that I guess you don't know till you know. But it's one of those courses I've encouraged family, I've encouraged friends, because if you take it here at Endeavor, it's free.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
It's like, why not? Just go, and it's 4 hours of something that you hope you never have to think about again.
These guys that are, shooting up schools, these aren't Navy SEALs. Mm-hmm. They are, they're normal guys, probably with very little to no training at all. So there are things you can do, I'm sure, to alleviate the problem without being a victim.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing he gets into too, is the whole course isn't like, hey, how am I going to get this shooter? Mm-hmm. It's understanding your options.
Right.
And at the very end, like if you have no other choice, fight.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But if you can evade, if you can get out of there, get out of there.
Always a safe bet, right?
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and he even goes in it because there's, not my area of expertise. I can't talk to his level, but, it's really fascinating, hearing like I'll watch him sit down with somebody with a concealed carry and then go through situations of when should you pull?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so many times you watch an individual at concealed carry just get it wrong. I'm not saying I even know it all, but it's interesting if you haven't just thought about it. If you haven't just said, okay, here's the situation, what do you do?
Because that's the way it's going to happen. It's going to be that quick, right?
Yeah.
Well, this is a great place. It's beautiful and your area in the back. So let's talk about Project Lift. We went back there and you were showing us the Project Lift area, and it reminded me of the old Iron Mind training hall videos. Man, it's a bare bones, I think probably purposely bare bone Olympic weightlifting training hall. It's not, you are in a CrossFit gym, but you have your area that looks to me like a place that the Russians are training in or something like that, and I'm guessing that was by design.
Yeah, Project Lift, when we first started on actually in the CrossFit gym. So what you saw with that doorway cut into the wall, it wasn't there. We were actually against that wall with 4 platforms. The CrossFit side actually had 3 just kind of mini pieces of wood put into their flooring, and we were able to use them on off-class hours. And so we really had 7 spots, and that's where we really kind of grew up. We've always been 2 separate entities, right? Yet we work very well together, have a really good partnership. So when that bay became available, it was time to expand, and we were actually having some growing pains where I kind of teased you before of saying, hey, I started on 3 platforms, and I'd get these young kids to come in and be like, hey, man, you need some more platforms.
Right.
And it's like, you don't even know.
Yeah.
You're spoiled.
Yeah.
And now that we have 9, it's just continuing to expand. Our next move is actually, you saw we have some raised platforms and some in-ground platforms.
Yeah.
So we're going to remove the raised ones and make it all flat, all in ground. 1, from a business standpoint, it increases our usable space. But 2, a lot of athletes, I hear this argument over like, well, if I have a couple layers of material, it softens the blow on me. Maybe I've heard some high-level athletes really swear that, lifting on thinner platforms, they can feel it the next day.
Right.
But I haven't heard as many of those complaints as I've seen really good lifters almost twist their ankle because they misstep on a raised platform.
That's true, yeah, right.
And you're kind of out of your head going, oh my gosh, this dude's going to nationals, and now he's holding his leg, sitting there. And from that,
and I'm guessing when you get those people, you're watching them step towards the front of that platform like, oh shit, where is this going to go?
You're like, oh my gosh, did that really happen? So it's one of those things, luckily, knock on wood, we haven't had any like, oh my God.
Yeah.
But we have had a couple of really good athletes like give themselves a scare, and you're just like,
yeah.
Let's move on from these.
So what's the goal of Project Lift? I mean, what kind of athletes are you getting? And so I'm looking at the athletes down there, and they look like a lot of 20-somethings, I'm guessing they probably started out in CrossFit and found a love for this, or?
A lot of them do. The goal of Project Lift is to help athletes reach their goal. And I know that's kind of like the broad stroke of the first layer of it, but what we found people really resonate, or our audience, is it seems to be individuals who want to compete in Olympic lifting with like a small little subset who are kind of coming in. They're like, I'm really interested in it. I just want to learn. But typically you see them stick their toe into the competitions once they feel comfortable. And then the other layer are athletes who have some knowledge that the Olympic lifts could help them compete in their sport, whether that's throwing, whether that's rowing, whether that's baseball. I'm just thinking of some of the athletes that their number one goal, we have a pole vaulter right now, and their number one goal is their other sport, but they see it as an opportunity to become more explosive. And I think CrossFit, from both stance of those 2 audience, have helped so much in our area, just in the States, of getting barbells in people's hands, to one, know it's an option. And then you look at some of these athletes, we get the high school athletes coming in and they want to use it. Typically, their parents have used the Olympic lift through CrossFit somehow.
Yes.
And then they're like, I think this could help you.
Yeah. I think that is a market is the CrossFit babies. You know, the kids that the parents have come through. All of a sudden, you know, they were 40-year-old guys on the couch, but all of a sudden they're jacked and they're moving well, and they're thinking to themselves, "Gee, you know, why isn't my kid doing this in his high school program?"
Yeah.
Or he's watching his kid do it in the high school program and going, "Holy shit, who's teaching these people how to do Olympic weightlifting?" And, you know, you start getting them in your gym that way.
Yeah.
I can definitely see that. I was having a conversation with Tyler down there about my thinking as far as Olympic weightlifting. I think our gym in Northern Ohio is the only functional fitness, quote unquote, gym that you haven't been at. And it's because we don't do Olympic weightlifting. And he was talking to me about that. I said, the reason why we don't do Olympic weightlifting is not because I think it's inherently dangerous or not effective or bad. It's because I don't do it well.
Yeah.
And I don't coach it well. So why would I make my athletes do that? You know, so we don't do very much of it. But I think that's a huge part of what you do is kind of give these CrossFit gyms some direction. So it's not just, oh, I took the 3-day CrossFit seminar and now I'm teaching Olympic weightlifting. So are you still doing that? Are you still doing the seminars? And
Yeah, I still travel around doing seminars. You know, one thing that we've done the last couple of years, even more than me being on the road, is we have a program called the 3-month coaching course, which actually we just renamed it this past session, which it's more the coaching mentorship program. Mm-hmm. And we started it off, our very first year, we had a number of gyms throughout Central Ohio, throughout Northern Ohio that we have worked with. And there was a resound need of, I would love to get more experience coaching. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, okay, well, how can we serve, this group? And we did it in person the first couple rounds of inviting coaches out. You could bring an athlete with you. And we basically had an outline over these 3 months that we were going to take the key principles and in a way force you to implement them.
Yeah.
And it was really, really nice. And I started to get requests from people that were far away, you know, so I've had a lot of coaches from Canada actually go through it.
Nice.
And so at that point, you know, sitting there going, okay, does it have to be in person? And at this time, we had done a good amount of remote coaching using Coach's Eye. Mm-hmm. And it's a fantastic tool. And I really just kind of sat there and I was like, well, let's try it. You know, and I had a couple coaches that had reached out because the page is on our website. And, you know, like, hey, like, I wish I was in the area. You know, and it was like, okay, well, if you'd be willing to be a guinea pig,
yeah,
you know, like, let's try this out. And it worked really, really well. The way it's structured is we still have that outline. We have lessons each week mm-hmm. that you go through, but then you have to submit homework. You have to submit these videos of you applying these things with an athlete.
Right.
And then that gets reviewed, right? And then you get that feedback to go into the next week to build upon it.
Yeah.
And then about the halfway point, you actually start doing the review and sending it to me. So now instead it's just like, okay, you've implemented this drill or you've implemented this lesson and you're filming what we asked. Now you have to film it and then you have to tell me what you see.
Yeah.
And that's created so many great conversations mm-hmm. With that. And honestly, the coaches, I try to keep in touch as many as I can of just like, hey, what's going on? How's it been affecting you? And we've had really good positive feedback around that.
Yeah, that's interesting because no one really teaches you how to coach.
No.
You know, whether we come from similar backgrounds in my background's in the throws, yours is in the Olympic lifts. They're both two events where you have to have an eye for things moving at high speed. I don't have it with the Olympic lifts. I have it with the shot and the discus. And that's an eye I think you develop over the years. But the ability to coach those highly technical events, nobody teaches you how to do that. Yeah. You know, it's a crapshoot. Do you become a good coach or do you have no way of really relaying that knowledge onto your athlete? It's a really interesting concept you have.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing. I had the privilege back in the day to work on the USAW level 1s. Right?
That's a great seminar. I took that years ago.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's a great seminar. And the one thing that I always felt bad at the end of it was I know you're going to go home and have a million questions. Mm-hmm. And what do you do?
Yeah.
And it's amazing to me, Mark, amazing to me how many people, whether the level 1 or just in the seminars that I travel and teach, where I wholeheartedly, and I mean this, like if you have a question, reach out.
Yeah.
Shoot me an email.
Yeah.
And I always make the joke. I go, I'm not going to be like, no, you know, like
I'm done. I'm not getting paid to coach you any longer.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Ask the question. And so few do it. And I'm always curious, like, do they really think like, oh no, I don't want to bug them?
Yeah.
Or do they just kind of like, whatever. So, one of the things I talk about when someone's reached out about finding more information about the coaching mentorship program is, have you ever gone to a seminar, had a great 2 days, 3 days, whatever it might be, and then come back to your gym just to find like multiple fires burning. Yeah. You're running around putting out fires. Who knows what else happens.
Right.
And then 2 weeks later, you look at the piles of paper on your desk and you're like, dang. And the little conversations and whatnot are kind of blurry by then.
Yep.
And so that's the thing. I look at this mentorship as an opportunity to get to hold them accountable to, like, here is one of the basic principles that you might see in a level 1 type scenario. Apply it.
Yeah.
Let me see it. But then because we have 3 months and because it's over the course of 90 days, we get to go into some more advanced stuff that they don't get into much, like looking at the function of the core, looking at stability, looking at how do we take some of these other movements and could they help our weightlifters?
Right.
It was fun getting to meet Josh for that split second, just because there have been some experiments that I've run in here with some of our athletes using some strongman stuff. And by no means would I say like, oh, I know strongman. I just got to learn a little bit, and then took that. And what I really loved, like looking at stones, like how do you get braced? And if you don't push with your legs off the floor, holy moly.
Yes.
And you look at that and go, okay. I'll never forget when I was just starting to go, could I play with a little bit of this and see how it would affect an athlete, was when one of my better lifters could easily clean 150 kilos. Snatch was around the 120s, good national level lifter. And I was doing a workout myself with a 150-pound sandbag, and I hate that thing, and you pick it up, and I just, it had, I can't even remember the mix of it. I think I had to walk it down 60 feet, drop it, then I had to farmer's carry something back, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was just like this little mix, but I had like 90 seconds of rest between sets or something like that, and I'm kind of standing there huffing and puffing, and he like sticks his head in, and smiles at me, and I smile back, and he comes over and he's looking at it, and he reaches down for this bag. He couldn't get it up.
Yeah.
And I was like, and looking at going, okay, how can we play with this? And one of my athletes, he's just turning to a master. So I think we started this program when he was about 33, 34, just playing with it. And it was remarkable how well he started to understand bracing his core, getting his core set, pushing with his legs. And it wasn't just, it had strongman components in it, had lifting in it, had multiple things in it. But basically his wish when he came to me is like, what do you want to do? He's like, well, I'd like to compete still. And he goes, but I don't want to hurt.
Yeah.
He goes, he's in nursing school. He's got a kid, a second coming now, and he's like, I don't want to hurt. He goes, I just want to have fun, and I wouldn't mind learning some new things. So I was like, I've not tested this at all. I go, you'd be a guinea pig. And he goes, okay. We went probably through, I bet you like maybe 4 months with kind of a mixture of sprinkling this in. And then he had a meet come up, and he hit a lifetime PR in the clean and jerk. And he was standing up with one of these cleans. And I remember thinking to myself, when's the last time he squatted?
Right.
Right. And then I felt really bad because in that moment I couldn't immediately say.
Yeah.
And then after the meet, he was all jacked. I went back to my computer and I started scanning. And I mean, we had some squats here and there, but not anything programmed to where you would say that's a squat program. And if anything, the last structured thing was he had a more of a unilateral focus about 6 weeks prior. And some of the unilateral work has really, really helped us in here as well.
It's interesting you talk about that. One of my and I come from a very conjugate background. And again, we don't do a lot of Olympic weightlifting, but we have been really in the last year implementing heavier strongman movements into our conditioning. And when we bring in the athletes now, I'm getting huge carryover from things like Atlas stone loads to the shoulder or tire flipping. Whereas, again, I'm not teaching the snatch, but I'm getting the same benefit out of that hip movement and the explosion with the lower back, but I can teach them to flip a tire in 3 minutes, as opposed to maybe, if I went down there and got on the platforms, it could take you years to teach me to properly drop under a bar, So that's really interesting, and it brings me to some things I saw down there while we were hanging out, and I am so out of the loop when it comes to Olympic weightlifting. When you hear the knock on Olympic weightlifting coaches in the United States, a lot of it is they only squat, front squat, snatch, and clean and jerk. But I'm watching one of your girls over there do banded marches. I'm watching some strict pressing. I'm watching the drill you were doing where you were holding the band for the girl. So what's your philosophy on when you have a high-level athlete or you have athletes that want to compete, are you using some, I guess they would be called auxiliary type exercises to strengthen weaknesses and that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say what you said about Olympic weightlifting coaches across the nation being known for those things, you're dead right. I would say when we talk about it, we typically, I guess our slang is kind of the old regime, just kind of that old school coach where it's nothing but snatch, clean and jerk, squats, sagittal plane. Here we are all day.
Yeah, right.
I went through a pretty good hip injury back when I was actively competitive. And when it really boiled down, it was I had really lost some key function, around my glute. Just really my obliques did not want to do what they should be doing.
Yeah.
And it's really pretty fascinating when you look at okay, well, how does breakdown happen, right? So it was to the point where I couldn't even bend down to get into the fridge. I had to do this, looked like one-legged pistol kind of looking thing.
Right.
It was really funky. But going through that process, all my ego was taken out. It was okay, you can't even get into the fridge. So I started working with Dr. Richard Olm here in town.
I know Rich, yeah.
And
I know Rich for years.
So Rich told me years ago, he would kind of call out Drew, you do X, Y, and Z, and that's not really good.
Right.
And my ego was kind of yeah, Rich, but I lift a pretty good amount of weight, and things seem to be going my way. There was I think I had knee pain at one point, and I did go to him, and we worked on some stuff, and it helped, right? But again, my ego still was there to where it wasn't okay, well, let me really understand this, right? And, whenever I would ask around about some of the stuff that I hear, the only thing I kind of get is, well, nobody else does that, So it was kind of okay, well, I'm going to stick to the program, do what I'm doing. Boom, hip injury happens. I'm out, right? And I go and see a doctor at OSU, and he's it was actually just a physical therapist. It wasn't a sports med doc. But went and saw him, and he was like, oh, this is, open shut case, torn hip labrum. Get a quick scope, you'll be back good as new, I'm not a huge fan of the thought of surgery.
Yeah, me neither.
Especially immediate, jump to it.
Right, yeah.
So I'm a huge fan of multiple opinions,
Yeah.
and so
always helps when they're going to slice you open.
Right. So I'd went to, I think 3 chiropractors, 2 physical therapists, and everybody was saying surgery except for Rich. And what Rich was saying was maybe, he wasn't saying surgery wasn't going to happen, but he was maybe. And he's I've told you for how long this has not been good. And he's like, he looked at me and goes, you have two options. And I go, what? And he goes, I can treat you in here and help you get out of pain, and you can continue doing what you're doing. And he goes, or I'll treat you in here, and I'll write a program for you for the gym, and I'll match my program to my treatment, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
And I thought that just sounded,
absolutely.
And I was like, cool, man, let's do it. And so during this time frame, I was right before the American Open, so I had to pull out. I went through about 6 weeks truly of just nothing, trying to stay out of the range of motion, let inflammation go down, did like one of those 10-day anti-inflammatory type treatments, just trying to get swelling out of the hip. And then finally after all that, during that time, Rich was treating here and there, but not a ton. It was just let the inflammation out. Then we started treatment, and in a 4-month period, and why I say a 4-month period is Rich still told me, go and see the hip surgeon that OSU would recommend. And I guess, for anybody listening, if you're ever looking at surgery, ask yourself who does the most, and if you look at who does the most hip scopes, there's a guy in New York, number one, actually a guy here in Columbus, Dr. Thomas Ellis does the second amount, and then a guy down in Memphis, just in our region, for how many hips they see.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, well, cool. He's in our backyard. I can go at number 2.
Right.
Yeah. So his waiting list, 16 weeks. So I get on his waiting list, and we just start going after it, both in the gym and in the office. And Mark, I kid you not, like my symptoms were clicking, popping, couldn't get into flexion. Like if I went down into a squat and relaxed, right? Like it was just
interesting.
It'd just be sharp, But clicking, popping, and multiple times I'd have to get out of bed in the middle of the night, kind of push your hips forward to pop, And I'm just like, man. So we're going through this, and I'm going through this program, and slowly the clicking's going away, slowly the popping's going away, and next thing I know, a week before this meeting with this surgeon, I'm back to 85% of my best lift.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And I'm just going, okay. So I go in and see the surgeon, and he's like, I always tease because he really was like Rain Man. You know? He's like looks at my report and he's like, okay, and he like lays me back and he like takes my leg and his eyes are closed and he's just like twisting my leg around and like saying numbers out loud.
Right.
And I'm just like, okay, cool, right? And he does both legs and he sits down and he just looks at me with this puzzled look, and I just kind of stare back at him, and he's like lifts my report and he goes, this makes no sense. And drops it on the table. And I go, what do you mean? And he goes, points at me, he goes, that's a perfectly fine hip.
Yeah.
And I go, well, the MRI. So again, for the people listening out there, I was trying to do this on the cheap. I was just, truly weightlifting was my focus. My job was shaped around how could I train. I mean, okay, you're trying to pinch pennies, So I only had an MRI. And when I got to the surgeon, he ordered an X-ray. So he goes, the X-ray, he goes, look, and he pulls up my X-ray, he goes, you're not even genetically predispositioned to a hip injury. You have no pincer, you don't have cam, the growths on the femur or the pelvis. And he goes, and I go, well, the MRI said 2 partial tears. And he just kind of like gave me this like sour face.
Yeah.
And he turns his back and he pulls open the computer and he's looking and he pulls up my MRI and he's like scanning through the images and he stops and there's this tiny little black hairline, black line. And he points and he goes, maybe. And he goes, but Drew, you got to understand. He goes, 80% of people walking
I was going to ask you
have
that.
one of these.
Yeah.
Right. And so I asked him, I go, okay, well, let me ask you this. I go, can you fall out of movement pattern? I go, for whatever reason, injury, tweak, fall out of a tree. And I go, and then you start moving differently from that point on. And I go, and because I'm going through such extreme ranges of motion with heavy weight, inflammation builds up and then gives off signs of labral tear. He got this huge grin and he goes, every day.
Yeah.
And he looked at me and he goes, most people don't spend 16 weeks to fix it.
Right.
And at that point, I went back to Dr. Olm and I said, hey, what'd you do? Like, what'd you do? Because explain to me how, all of a sudden, here's this just completely removed. I couldn't even get into the fridge.
Yeah.
And now, add in the 6 weeks plus 16, say 24 weeks, just round it up. 24 weeks later, I'm cooking, and that led me to DNS, which is dynamic neuromuscular stability,
Mm-hmm.
taught out of the Prague Institute, and just really, really fascinating stuff, looking at how the body stabilizes, braces, and taking this big, long story for all of us back to, I think, your original question around, do we use auxiliaries?
Mm-hmm.
You know, my philosophy is athletes should have a functional foundation, right? Like, yes, we have specialties where, okay, we're doing our sport in the sagittal plane, and I want to be able to snatch and clean and jerk, right? But at what point do we take time to pull us back towards neutral and make sure our foundation's there to then allow us periods of specialization?
Yeah.
You know, and I think, you know, you talking about throwing, and this is one thing once I realized it and had actually some more conversations with throwers, because I feel throwing and the Olympic lifts have a whole lot of carryover.
Yeah.
Is where in the world did track and field and throwing get the good advice of having an off season, and why didn't weightlifting?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because like,
Yeah.
okay, you guys get to go and do technique, and you're in season and you're competing, but then you have an off season,
Right.
But another thing with the old school weightlifting, you see it's snatch and clean and jerk, front squat and back squat all year long.
Mm-hmm.
So we've actually been playing with off seasons here and looking at that, and we've had some fantastic results. Stephanie Hone, where I would say my wife Chelsea Kyle's coach one of Stephanie, but Stephanie's also a personal trainer.
Yeah.
And she's smart. She's really has a good head on her shoulder around training and her body, and it's almost a coaching relationship of working with her to design this off-season program, and did wonders for her.
I love to hear that. It's always, and I think one of the things that's come out in the last couple of years was Louis' book on Olympic weightlifting. I read the book. He took an incredible amount of heat in the book.
Oh yeah.
But if you read the book, he didn't say anything about how to Olympic weightlift.
Yeah.
There was nothing about Olympic weightlifting. He has some things that he likes that I'm sure he's never really trained a high level Olympic weightlifter. So I'm sure these are more theories he's putting forth. But I think the major focus of the book was do more shit than just back squat, front squat, snatch, and clean. Where do you think this philosophy came from? I mean, are we looking at American coaches looking at what the Russians were doing in training halls close to meets and not what they were doing 6 months out from meets, and just trying to copy that? Or where do you think that philosophy came from for some of these old timers?
You know, I would say a bit of that. What are other countries doing? You look at the Bulgarian method of just like, okay, we're going 100%, we're going 100%, we're going 100%.
With super high level athletes.
Super high level athletes. And, you know, it's one of those things where you look at some of the systems, I almost see them as meat grinders.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, okay, if we take 1,000 people and put them in the meat grinder, you're going to have one or two that fall out that have the genetics to be able to take it.
And so you take those few, you don't make them work. You give them every supplement known to man that's going to get more weight on the bar.
Yeah.
You know, they have no stress outside of the 3 workouts they do every day.
Yeah.
And they're the ideal specimen to do that.
Yeah. And I think so many people out there, you know, and listening don't understand or just have a hard time connecting, especially if you're listening and you're a full-time professional, you know, or even have a job. Like, if you truly want to be the best in whatever sport you're doing, those things matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember in one of the times I was invited out to Olympic Training Center, back when we had Zygmunt Smallshirts as the national coach in the country, I think I was either sick, because there was one time I was out there and got sick. That was, you know, being sick away from home is not fun.
Yeah.
But I can't remember if I was sick or for whatever reason I wasn't in the training hall, and Holly Mangold was talking with Zygmunt, and she told me later, she goes, Zygmunt was asking about you, and I go, oh, what do you say, you know? And he was like, what does Drew do for work? You know, and at the time I was doing some kind of marketing-based project management stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, oh, just like computer, he's on a computer.
Right.
You know, and he goes, oh, he works with his mind?
Yeah.
like that? And she goes, well, yeah, and he's like, oh, never be great, and I've thought about that forever, and Holly was like, told me that conversation. She was like, I was like, well, it's not physical,
Right.
he's not doing physical labor. And he's like, no, he goes, this exhausted stills matter,
Yeah.
and I'm pointing at my head as I'm doing that. But I've thought about that a lot. And I'm not trying to deflate anybody's, pop anybody's bubble out there of like, you can't have a job and still be good.
Sure.
But what you just said, these individuals who are able to be supported and
Yeah.
they can crank through that machine.
Yeah.
You know what
and
I
they
mean?
started when they were 6, and to become Stefan Botev, you have to do the things that he did and have all the things that the gods gave him, to get there. It's interesting that he talked about the mental, that stress, whether it's a heavy back squat or your girlfriend breaking up with you or having to focus on some work project day and night until it's done, because if not, you don't get paid. Yeah, stress is stress, right?
Stress is stress.
Yeah.
And it affects us in big ways.
Have you read Louis' book on that? On the weightlifting?
I haven't sat down and read the whole book.
Yeah.
I've seen a number of the exercises from it. A couple of the athletes where he was inviting some of the higher level USA athletes in town. A few of them stopped by here, and we just hung out and talked.
Yeah.
And I got their perspective and saw their videos of them doing it. I think it's interesting.
Yeah.
I think from the standpoint of, if the message is get out and do more things other than just that, I agree.
That's the message I got from the book, was here's some options, here's some different ways, to some things you should be doing maybe instead of just those 4 basic movements.
But you look at some of the stuff, it's one of those things I feel with anything out there, there's too little and too much. And you look at some of the band drills, now you saw me down there holding a band for a girl as she was kind of going from above the knee to the hip, right? And we don't do much banded lifts. It's very specific, so for her, it's trying to make her feel, can I keep my lats on yet stay long without cranking into my erectors?
Right. Yep.
And all that band was doing was giving her a little bit of resistance while she was trying to feel that movement. Now, for an athlete who has a tremendously difficult time pulling with their fist, I've seen, like, okay, let's set up a lightweight banded clean, right? I've seen that surprise an athlete where they go, oh, you mean, I got to pull with my fist, right? And then you take the bands off, and now they're moving well.
Yes.
And then I've seen gyms actually take some of those methods and do like a block of training with it. And then when they come out of that band work, they're doing some of the funkiest things I've ever seen, because they're anticipating the resistance to be there, but it's not, right? And they should be changing direction. So you have to be careful from the band work making you trying to pull the bar higher versus at what point should you be changing direction,
right?
And that mixture, right? So I would, but the thing is, knowing and talking with some of the higher level athletes and coaches in the country, I feel like I'm probably one of the more accepting, open to testing. Like, it was really interesting. I was talking with one of the athletes about sled pulls, right? And he's like, well, I'm not sure, because we're trying to create force vertically, not create force, forward, horizontally. And I go, you're in the sagittal plane. I go, stabilizing muscles or having to do work as you're continuously keeping tension on the sled and you're moving. And the only reason I was arguing for it was I had done a bit of sled work, and it just made my lower half feel strong.
Yes.
And it was so fascinating around some of that, but yeah.
I agree with you, and sometimes you can't quantify with a graph and a chart what's going to make you better. And if you feel like something's working for you, a lot of time it's going to work for you.
Yeah.
And we're doing so much experimenting right now with athletes in outside the traditional of lower body, upper body, lower body, upper body, or 2 max effort, 2 speed, and trying to put things in there. And a lot of it came from my son, who's a 13-year-old, who, when we were working with athletes, went, Dad, I don't feel like I'm getting stronger. This isn't hard enough. We have to do something else. And I said, if he thinks going harder in these crazy strongman stuff is going to make him stronger. I bet you it makes him stronger. So it's interesting to hear that, and I think it's refreshing for me, because if I got an Olympic weightlifter who came into my gym, first of all, I would tell him flat out, go see Drew for your technique work, because you don't want me doing that with you. But it would be interesting to come up with ways to get him out of the hole better. How to make your legs stronger. Is he weak in the hamstrings? Is he weak in the glutes? Does his lower back suck? And I'm guessing you get more athletes who need that when they're fresh off the boat and I want to do Olympic weightlifting, and you look at them and go, we've got some work to do outside of just teaching you how to clean and snatch.
Yep.
Do you see that a lot?
Yeah, I mean, really with everybody.
Yeah.
Whether you're coming from CrossFit, it's interesting. I was actually just writing something the other day. We get a lot of athletes who have already been in pain, and then we help get them out of pain and then get them moving to be able to do this. Like you said, you're getting benefits from tire flips using similar mechanisms as a snatch. The one thing I love about the Olympic lifts is I just feel they're great baselines or something to shoot for, in the sense of like, hey, if I'm able to do one of those safely, well, and strong, like, holy moly, how I've put together mobility, stability, speed, agility,
Yep.
And I think it is such a multifaceted movement that's a really fun target, let alone even taking it from that and then looking at competing.
Yeah. And, you can look at it from two different angles. Is doing Atlas stones and tire flips going to help my Olympic weightlifting? Or maybe I'm a strongman athlete who's learning the snatch and the clean and jerk to help me better with Atlas stones and tire flipping. So it all, that goal kind of floats. I used to have a friend who would tell me that you needed to be, he was a fantastic Olympic weightlifter. His name was Kurt Pauley. And he would tell me that, you needed to be able to train at 80-90% of your Olympic lifts for these to be super effective to transfer over to your throws. And I used to tell him, well, Kurt, that's fine, because you are extremely efficient and can handle 80-90%, where I'm doing a deadlift into a reverse curl. So my 80-90% is, number one, way lower than yours and way more destructive on my body because I don't do anything correctly. Yeah. And it's I think where you put your primary focus should be where you move the best. Are you a guy like Josh, who was just here, who is built like a giant Fred Flintstone and can just, slam tires over? But, maybe we can't teach Josh to drop under a bar as effectively as some of those young girls down there who look like they're, ex-gymnasts or something, It's interesting stuff. So we're just back from Singapore.
Yeah.
What were you there for?
So we've had an athlete out there working with us remotely for a while now. And she actually came to us. It was interesting, and she reached out. She was like, I've saw a number of your videos. I've read about different things you guys have done online. She's like, here's the list of injuries I've had from CrossFit. I really like the lifts. People are telling me I can't do them. And it just seems like how you guys approach them. I have a feeling that, is there any way you could help me?
She couldn't do them because she was injured?
Yeah.
Or, okay.
She had lower back stuff. She had slap tear in her shoulder, just multiple things. So really there's a prime example of going, okay, well, are you out of pain? Where are we at with that? Right? Then working on that foundation and then building that up. So we went through a bunch of work. I think we built the foundation pretty well. Working remotely on something like that is amazingly difficult. And not only from the standpoint of how are we teaching it has to be on point, but the athlete receiving it, their communication and effort has to be more than if you were just getting to go to a coach in the gym.
Sure.
And how her feedback and everything. And she is a tremendously hard worker, does a great job with it. And we were doing pretty well. So now she was in the lifts and she was rolling along. Well, she got a tweak to her back, right? So this came up and it was like, okay, and she was in a pretty bad way emotionally and mentally. And it was like, hey, everything that you're telling me, everything we deal, like this happens, right? And so we put her together another program and she's super sweet, and sent it over to her, and she's like, oh my gosh, Drew, she's like, this is so much work on your point. She's like, can I pay you more? And I was like, well, no, I think what you pay us and how everything is listing, it's well within, like, I feel it's fair.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, but I go, what would you think about having me out, and then maybe I can do some teaching over there at some of the people and I go, I don't sit here and think to myself, I'm not getting paid enough for this. I go, I sit here and go, damn, I wish I could poke and push and move her into position. And right. And she's like, you'd be willing to do that? And I was like, yes. So we set it up, and I went out there, and it was a fantastic trip. But from an athletic standpoint, not only did I get to see and be with her in the gym, but then I also got to see some of these components that we kind of touched on a little bit earlier outside of the gym of what other stresses.
Mm-hmm.
She's a physician,
mm-hmm.
right? Her aim is to be the top 5 pathologist in Singapore, right?
Hugely stressful, I'm sure.
Huge goals, right? She's got a family,
mm-hmm.
And then training, and just having that conversation, really kind of a heart to heart, like, let's write down your priorities right
mm-hmm.
now. And she's like, well, and I go, listen, I'm going to write them out from everything I've seen.
Yeah.
And I go, and you give me an argument if I'm wrong.
Right.
Right. And I put career, right? I put family, and then I put training.
Yeah.
And I just kind of stared at her, and she's like, no, that's right. And I go, listen, you have to treat it like that and be okay. Because
mm-hmm.
I really feel the back injury came because she was fried at work. She had emotional stress going on with family. And then she's trying to get in to get these arbitrary numbers on this program done when, from a nervous system standpoint, wasn't there.
Mm-hmm.
So here she's in a rough way, fighting because she's stubborn, type A,
and now is failing.
And a piece of what makes her successful. She's fighting this tweak. Here's this tweak, and trying to get her comfortable. Was one of the things over the week I was working with her, is trusting herself, trusting her body,
mm-hmm.
and knowing when to live to fight another day. You know what I mean? Like here are your priorities. It is okay if you walk in and you're like, man, I just feel like I've been chewed up, stomped on, just
And that's the part about being a remote coach that's really difficult, because if she walked into your gym, you'd be able to go, you know what?
Go away.
Yep.
And so it's one of those things, and our communication is pretty neat, how well we communicate for being halfway around the world.
Yeah.
But, I told her I'm one message away.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you walk in and because she was like, I'm not sure, what if I'm just being weak? And I go, shoot me a message.
Mm-hmm.
And I go, but probably knowing you, like, if you probably could use some rest.
Yeah.
And I find that interesting, getting athletes to understand. I talk about this a lot, of the formula to gains.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever your goal is, we can list as gains.
Mm-hmm.
So even if it's I don't want to say that, but looking at whatever your goal is, here's your gains. You have stress in the gym, whatever I'm doing to tear down, plus recovery equals gains.
Mm-hmm.
And finding that mix as an individual. Joe Lasco from over at Westside, him and I were having a conversation, and he said one thing that I just loved. And he goes, I did the best in all the time of being at Westside was when he realized, walking in on day 1, it wasn't, man, I'm going to go in here and go as intense as I can go. It was, how do I go in there and hit the maximum intensity that will allow me to be back to neutral by start of day 2.
Super smart way of looking at things.
And I was like, I was like, I loved how he said it.
Yeah.
Because it's like, you think of it as like a speedometer in your car, and it's like, okay, am I putting this thing into the red, or how can I hit, I guess tactometer, but how can I hit that point, put in an intense day of training, and then by noon the next day when I train again, I'm back to neutral.
Yeah.
To hit it again.
Yeah, and that's when we look at, and we have a traditional max effort day on Monday and Tuesday, and I try to stress to people, look, max effort is different than hitting a max. You may not hit your max. I want your best effort that day, but also maybe I want a 5-pound increase. I don't, even if you feel like you've got 20 in the tank, get that PR. Now you're at 85, 90% of what maybe you could have done and back off. So you can come back next week and do it again. It's not, oh, I hit this 5-pound PR. Now I'm going to try a 10-pound PR. Now I'm going to try a 15-pound PR. And now you're burnt out for 2 weeks and I can't get anything out of you.
Yeah.
I think that's a very tough lesson. We were downstairs and one of your girls was lifting and she hit a lift and Tyler goes, okay, that's enough. And she just looked at him like, are you kidding me? Like,
Yep.
I can do more, you know? And I bet you
I know exactly.
she'll come back next week and be better off the fact that he told her to stop right there,
Yeah.
you know?
She had a major breakthrough, getting her to realize that, let's just make up arbitrary numbers. If you have 5 singles at 80%, misses count.
Mm-hmm.
And no, you don't get to add an extra one.
Yep.
And 2, if you're still holding on to the lift that just happened, you're probably going to miss this one too.
Yep.
And when she kind of got those things in her head, you all of a sudden started to see her string together makes. And it was just so interesting. And I think the thing she really realized was how often she would be on the past one walking into the next one.
The next one, right?
Versus, this is a new lift.
Yep.
This is a new opportunity.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it was fun to watch some of those guys down there go through the paces. And what's the culture like in Singapore as far as weightlifting? I mean, we're close to China, but we're dealing with an entirely different society.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is there influences over there from, you know, what is going on with the Chinese team? They seem to be the top dogs now, as opposed to where we were maybe 20 years ago.
Yeah.
What are they doing differently than everybody else?
Oh, it's interesting when I've heard things about the Chinese system. One thing that always stands out to me, I just keep in my mind, is they talk a lot about the path of least resistance.
Mm-hmm.
And when I look at my technical model of the lift, there's key points in it that I like,
Mm-hmm.
but I guess I am lenient to a point, yet also willing to hypothesize and test around they're close to that point. Does everybody really have to nail that point to this specific degree?
Mm-hmm.
Or what's this path of least resistance, right? They're moving through that point,
Right.
Maybe slightly different than somebody else. Is it good or bad? So that's something that you see them talk about a lot. The other thing is just, you hear a lot of people talk about when it comes to Chinese, is just how many people they have to choose from.
Right.
They still
right.
have a system set up where it's monitoring these youth athletes, looking for traits they feel fit certain sports.
Mm-hmm.
So in weightlifting, I've heard they look at joint size. So depending on your joint size, they might already have you mapped out for weightlifting.
Yeah.
And what the craziest thing I just blows my mind is you look at a Lu Xiaozhong, or any of the other great Chinese weightlifters. It's like they got 5 behind them that are just as good.
Right. They all are the exact same body type, and you just. Yeah.
Which is just mind blowing. But from Singapore's standpoint, looking at their CrossFit culture, their functional fitness culture, it's definitely taken a hold there.
Mm-hmm.
It seems a lot of them are sniffing onto the fact okay, I can just be functional fitness and not be CrossFit.
Mm-hmm.
And you're seeing a number of them do that. They are influenced from the Chinese, and I've heard that a number of the higher level Chinese and Russians have come through and done clinics
Mm-hmm.
there. So you see a mixture, but as I was watching them, the number of athletes I got to see, I didn't see any strong you can tell that they've been trained a certain way. So you kind of have that mixture going
A little
on.
bit of freedom of choice takes away from that strict upbringing of the training, where I think people don't realize that's never going to work in the United States. We're never going to be picking out model athletes. We're not, we're going to let guys who are 6'5" come and do Olympic weightlifting, and it's not ever going to be that way. Do you think that is the reason why? You hear a lot of reasoning behind why the United States isn't super successful in Olympic weightlifting anymore. Do you think that's more of a reason why we're not successful as opposed to, oh, well, they're all on drugs and we're clean?
I think a big component is our youth taking an interest in getting a barbell in their hand early.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think of Leo Hernandez.
Mm-hmm.
So Leo Hernandez is a Cuban athlete who moved here to the States, got his citizenship, and then started competing for us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I get this call. He was down in Florida at a gym I'd worked with years ago. And I get this call like, hey, this guy's coming up to the Arnold. Is there any way you can help him? I was like, yeah, just let me know the details.
Yeah.
Well, with everything that happens around the Arnold, I forgot to follow up.
Mm-hmm.
They never got me any details. And next thing I know, I have this guy tapping on my shoulder who only speaks Spanish.
Yeah.
And I don't speak Spanish.
Right.
And I felt just so bad. And it's like I could have gotten you somebody that could speak Spanish.
Pretty easy, right. Pretty easy fix.
So here, I'm in that session in the warm-up room just watching. He's literally warming himself up in a second language. He's a 77-kilo lifter, so about 170 pounds body weight, and he ends up snatching like 130 and clean and jerking like 155.
Mm-hmm.
He did big numbers for a 77 that I've never seen before, And I'm just like, who is this guy? So, he speaks a bit of English, but he's just more comfortable in Spanish. So I'm kind of talking with him, and I'm like, how long have you been lifting? And he's like, 6 months. And I'm like, I kind of like tripped,
right.
I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes, no. He's like, in Cuba, I have lifted since I was 6 years old.
Right.
He goes, but I took 2 years off and now I've been back for 6 months. And I was like,
yeah, that's a huge difference.
Oh, right. But you look at that, and as I've gotten to talk with him more, their system is set up, or it was set up in Cuba, where if you got into one of these sport programs, you went to school for half the day,
mm-hmm.
and then they would transport you over to the gym,
mm-hmm.
and then you would train. And they didn't do weight-bearing exercises until they got closer to their teens. They did a whole lot of body weight, a whole lot of movement, a whole lot of games. And then as they started to near, then they started to bear some body weight in that kind of pre-teen, teen time frame.
Yeah.
And now you have a guy who's just, and did it for us for a couple years. You can't say it was drugs, did it for us clean on USADA's watch.
Yeah.
And you look, and it's one thing when I first saw CrossFit doing what it was doing by putting barbells in people's hands,
mm-hmm.
where just like you said, you look at the parents going, they're getting the understanding that this isn't dangerous.
Yeah.
To say, hey, take little Johnny, and let him move. I think you do more of that, and we're right there.
Yeah. I went and saw Boris Shako speak last summer, I think it was, and he talked about the youth program in the old Soviet Union, and it was talking about that. And then I also saw a podcast Joe Rogan had on Yoel Romero. Mm-hmm. He was talking about the Cuban system where, they're the half day, and then they would go to the gym, and the better you are at your sport, the better the food got. And it put this intensity into their training that, hey, you're wrestling to be the top of the food chain, and if you get hurt, there's guys in the cafeteria watching you to see, what's wrong. Is his arm tweaked? But Boris talked about youth sports and getting young athletes in. And my son started out, I just put a thing on Facebook this week about this, how when he was a baby, I did things like just moving his shoulders back and forth. And then when he was old enough to walk, I would just drop a medicine ball off the couch, and he'd put the medicine ball back on the couch, and I'd drop it off again. And when he was done playing that game, it was done. And then he got into gymnastics and calisthenics and that kind of stuff. So now he's lifting weights. But I think what we see with kids these days is there's no base leading up to their competitive sport. Mm. All of a sudden they're playing tackle football in the 4th grade. And I know that I started playing tackle football in the 6th grade. And by the time I was in the 12th grade, I was done with tackle football. I did not want to play football anymore. I was burnt out, and I had injuries. And we're seeing a lot of these kids that don't have that base that you talk about, this wide spread base of being able to do everything. And they're not just playing JO volleyball all year round when they're not playing regular volleyball, and they're not playing, softball or wrestling all year round. I think we need to get these kids a huge, or the biggest base we possibly can before we force them into this. And, I think CrossFit is great for that. I think, if someone came to you with their, I don't know, 9-year-old daughter and said, hey, she's got all the, he's been in CrossFit and he's on the internet. She's got all the physical tools to be a great Olympic weightlifter. What's the starting point for her when she comes in?
Oh, well, honestly, the same as a lot of athletes, which is kind of funny, but rhythm and timing drills. Mm-hmm. Looking at rhythm and timing, looking just how she's moving, a variety of different movements. She'll get to lift. It's funny because my wife, Chelsea, started when she was 12, and back then you couldn't find a kids bar.
Sure,
right?
Yeah,
and her
right.
dad's a welder by trade and actually made her
Wow.
her own bar. And
Yeah.
I can show it to you. So we got a number of like little bars down there.
Yeah.
That just getting them moving, getting them understanding positions, working on their confidence approach. They might do a little meet again, really lightweight, but I'm a big component of looking at competition as practice in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Going in like, what do I do? What's my mindset do?
Right.
And then she's open to the off season as well, in the sense that she might get a little bit of competitive time, maybe get to go to youth nationals, have some fun. But then outside of that, she's farmer carrying kettlebells. She's,
Right.
running around. It was hilarious because I say this because you asked that question, but we do have a girl who started when she was 9, and her mom would stand out there and watch her and shake her head and yell about the school system because the girl couldn't skip.
Right.
So like we're
Right.
running next to her trying to teach her
Yes.
how to skip, and she's like, "How's my daughter not know how to skip?"
Right. Or jump rope.
know?
Oh yeah, we get that so often. Kids just have no physical culture at all. Nothing. Basic stuff that I don't even think about. Oh, go grab a rope. We're gonna skip rope in this conditioning workout. They've never done it before, and they're 12 years old, 13 years old. Yeah, the base that should be in our physical education program is now falling on CrossFit coaches to teach, which is insane to me.
It really is, and you look at sport-specific programs for these youth athletes as well. I mentioned DNS earlier. The neat thing about going through the DNS Sport Series is just some of the elbows I got to rub. One of the instructors in the country is the the head trainer for the St. Louis Cardinals. And just super nice guy, but just got to talk with him, just kind of a sidebar. And he told me, he goes, you want to know how to make your son a pitcher in the Major League Baseball? And I go, a bite,
Sure.
like, how? And he goes, don't let him pitch till he's 18. And I was just like, oh man, but you watch, and the things you see with youth baseball. I was a big baseball player. I didn't pitch, but I was a catcher. But you just look how much kids play. You got high school ball, and then you got league this and travel
14-year-olds getting Tommy John surgery, and
it's just such a bummer.
Yeah, it's tough because listening to Boris, and he was talking about how the training for kids at certain levels, and at that 4th, 5th grade, they're maybe practicing their sport 2 hours a week, and the rest is active play and learning to skip and doing these games. And I look at the time, my son, who was probably in the 5th or 6th grade, was practicing football 2 hours a night, 5 days a week, and I'm like, this couldn't be more wrong what we're doing, with these kids. And but if you were to do that, and instead of having football practice where they're learning plays and doing it, if you had them out skipping and playing pickup basketball or doing gymnastics, I think the other parents on the field would lose their fucking minds. It would be all over with, because now you might lose 3 out of the 7 games you're playing because, but what are we doing? Are we preparing these athletes for sport later in life or health later in life? Or are we trying to win football games when they're 5th grade? Like, who cares? It drives me nuts. I go so down the rabbit hole on this thing.
Hey, it's really true. I think about my phys ed, growing up, and I think it was still at a point where we did a lot of good movement.
Yes. Yeah.
I grew up just south of Wellington, Ohio. So just kind of out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, well, that's where I'm from. You know, that's where I'm from.
And so just kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and I was just always outside.
Yeah.
Always outside playing. But same thing, I played a ton of baseball, and by the time I hit high school, I was bored.
Yeah,
You
right,
know?
yeah.
And I really enjoyed it, but I don't know, you were just burned out.
Yeah, I picked up a shot put my sophomore year. Well, by the time I was a senior, I really wanted to throw.
Yeah.
But I'm getting recruited by these MAC schools for football, and I'm like, I really don't want to get yelled at by a football coach for another 4 years, you know, and
Right.
go through 2 days. But there's something to be said for picking that up later in life. And when did you pick up weightlifting?
I didn't pick up weightlifting until the end of college.
Okay.
I was 22, 21 when I finally found it. And it was interesting because I've heard a lot of people who invest a lot of themselves into the sport.
Mhm.
When you go, hey, like what brought you to it? It's just like this weird draw. You know, you kind of see it and you kind of have this feeling like, oh, I think that'd be fun.
Yeah.
And then you go and try it and you're like, wow, that really was fun.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, for 6 years, as long as I competed, it was just all I did.
Yeah.
You know, I shaped everything around it. And kind of back to that conversation around that priority list.
Mm-hmm.
You know, some of my athletes in the gym, they get frustrated and they're like, oh, well, I'm not getting as good as I want to be as quickly as I want, which don't we all wish,
Sure,
you know, we
yeah.
could do that. But the other thing is, it's like, dude, you have a career.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like a real one. You went to college and
Yep.
got a good degree, and now you're in your career.
Yeah.
You know, like,
And, you know, if you can find an athlete, it's few and far between that you have an athlete who athletics is in that top 3 or 4 priorities. You know, if lifting is your number 3 or 4 priority, that's better than probably 90% of the population. I mean, you're doing all right.
Yeah.
You know, you're going to improve, but
so be kind to yourself.
right. Yeah, that's right. You know.
You know, that's another huge conversation that we have in here. You know, it's one of those things, and maybe you can attest to this, but I try to help them see the difference between being tough on yourself and being a dick.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
being a
right.
dick makes you not want to come back, or it makes you doubt, it slows you down.
Mm-hmm.
And if you truly just keep showing up, you'll have the ahas.
Yeah.
You will. But we can't say when it'll click.
Yep.
But the one thing I can say is that if you don't come anymore, it will never. You know?
Yeah.
But if you do keep coming, then it will. And trying to help them understand, like, what are the things in your control? You
Right.
know? Your intention, your focus, right? Your effort. So, like, okay, if you walked in this door and you're tired and everything else is going on in life, but you are intent, you stay focused on the program, and you put in the best effort you have of the day,
Yeah.
you've won,
Yeah.
right? Even if you didn't hit the numbers that you wanted because you don't have that control, you were
Yep.
just fried,
And all those workouts stack on top of each other, and in 10 years you're great.
you know?
You know, I tell people, you know, if you want to get strong, press something, pull something, and squat something heavy every day for the next 20, 30, 40 years. And by the end of it, you're going to be strong. You know,
Yeah.
it's not rocket science, but like you said, it's the intent and the focus. And I like that. Don't be a dick to yourself. You know, just, hey, I gave it all I could today, and it'll build on the workout I do on Wednesday, and it'll go from there.
Yeah, it's a really
great.
difficult thought process for someone who's new. I think about me. I was a temper tantrum thrower.
Yeah,
You would have
yeah.
been like, oh, this young idiot, you know?
Yeah.
But over many lessons, I always tease my athletes. I go, you know, there were weeks heading into competitions where I felt amazing and had the worst competition.
Yeah, right.
And then there were weeks that I felt horrible and had the best competitions. And what you realize is it doesn't matter.
Yep.
Just in that moment, it doesn't mean anything. So like as you learn that, you just kind of go. I always say you can tell a seasoned weightlifter when you watch them have a bad day, and they just calmly kind of shrug and go, "Guess it's not the day."
Yep.
See you
Next one will
tomorrow."
be better, hopefully. Yeah, it's so funny because I went through 17 years on the pro circuit of Highland Games, and you know, for a big part of that, I was trying to figure out, you know, that peak that's going to get me to that one meet where I'm going to be perfect, and it wouldn't happen. And you'd be like, what the hell? I did everything right. And then some days you would come out and when you're not supposed to be good, and you would throw a personal best, and then you just kind of resolve to the fact that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You just put in the work. Just put in the work as best you can. Take care of yourself as best you can. And sometimes you're going to be there, and sometimes you're not. There's not much you can do about it, you
Right.
know. Yeah, that's great. Well, what's up next for Project Lift? What's on the horizon?
Well, I mean, we're actually doing some new renovations going on in the gym.
Yeah.
So like I said, we're going to take them platforms out, finish out the floor, have some new equipment coming. We have the strongest unicorn right around the corner.
Saw that down there.
Right. So it's our weightlifting meet that we hold every year that we put a lot of spectacle into. We'll have backdrops and we'll have lights and
I think that's
beer
great for the
trucks
sport in
and,
general.
it's a fun weekend. And what I love about it is we hold it kind of to a higher regard in the sense of lower session total like numbers. So if you watch the World Championship and you go, oh man, they got 12 athletes and that was really nice. And you go to some of these local meets where it's like they got 20 in a session.
Right.
So now this session's 3 hours. And then guess what? It ran over. So
Yeah.
your session's starting late. This is our 6th year. For 5 years, we've either finished the day on time or early.
That's
right?
huge.
And that's something. So in addition to Strongest Unicorn right in the corner, we hold monthly competitions here. They're small. I see them as training meets. They're sanctioned. So, they're legit. You can come here, you get your lifts in, you can practice whatever element, or maybe it's your first meet, or you're just getting a meet tuning up, right? Whatever it is, we limit the amount of people that are in here. Only 2 sessions. They run on time. There are no surprises. Just boom, 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 boom.
Yep.
And that's one of the probably greatest compliments that I've enjoyed listening to people come and then come back. They're like, man, this compared to that other local meet, like, they're like, and I kind of peek my head around the corner and I'm just curious, and I'm like, what happened? And they're like, oh, we were behind on the first session.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh.
That's so big. We run meets all the time, and we try to hit PRs. How fast can we get through this? Because, you go to some of these competitions, and you're there all day.
All day.
And it's just it's right from the beginning. It's behind schedule. That drives me nuts. But yeah, and then it becomes something you actually want to compete at and show up for. And this isn't going to be so bad. It's going to be 4 hours of me working out, and then I'm done for the day. So.
Right. No surprises.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for having us. I'd love to do this again sometime. I think it was great, and I'd love to do it again sometime. Yeah,
anytime.
All right.
You're always welcome.
Drew Dillan, Project Lift. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Mark.
Been the Refined Savage. See ya.